So we're going to start off today talking about your first 7 chapters that you should have read of Huck Finn. I have some reading questions I want you to go through with a partner. So Huck Finn, it's on the weekly overview. It says on Tuesday we will. And there's a link there. It says Huck Finn reading questions chapter 1 through 7. You'll open those up. There are 7 questions that you'll answer. So you can go through them with a partner. Does anyone need to borrow a book today? Okay, so I'll grab some books. If you didn't do your reading, I would just suggest starting that so that you have something to say about the early questions, at least when we discuss it in about 20 minutes, okay? All right, so you need a book. But really, I would work with a partner. Some people like to work by themselves, but you can flush out a lot more complex ideas if you're with someone. Do you have a book? Yeah. Anyone else?
I guess.
Gentlemen, you have a book?
Oh, can I get?
Yeah. Do you need one?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so the 7 questions. The first one talks about the author's notice and explanatory. Those are 2 little blurbs right before the story starts. They're literally called the notice and explanatory. So read through those and tell me why you think Twain includes those and what effect they have on the reader. You're going to talk about Huck as a narrator and talk about why he's ideal for this story and why you think Twain made Huck the narrator. And then also in the next question, talking about what you think his most significant characteristic is. Then you're going to talk about Huck's early attitude towards Jim, so the widow's slave. And then there's this witch story about a hairball that's very entertaining, so you'll talk about that. And then, do you agree that Jim is caricatured early in the novel? Do you guys know what caricature means? Okay.
Like exaggerates for any feature.
Yeah, if you were drawing a caricature, right, you see like those political drawings, and like whenever Obama was drawn, he had huge ears, right, because he was bald, and so you could see them better. I don't know why they chose that particular feature. Trump always has very squinty eyes and huge lips, and his hair is like ridiculous. When you're talking about like in a literary work, basically it's like instead of making this person seem real with unique characteristics and traits. Let me make sure this is on. Okay, I did. Just making sure. Instead, you kind of just make him cookie cutter, right? He could be any slave or any black man or any person, right? And so instead of giving him unique and qualities and making him like giving him depth, right? You make him a very shallow, like, yeah, I don't really see you as a person type character, if that makes sense. Then you're going to compare and contrast Tom and Huck, specifically Tom's schemes, which are very entertaining. And then why do these contrast? Juxtaposition between Widow and Miss Watson and what they say about religion. If you look, I think it's page 11, about halfway through that chunky paragraph, is where both of the ladies talk about religion, so if that helps you. There's also a lot of other things said about religion during this section. So what are those, and what is Twain saying about religion in bringing up these examples? And then finally, Pap. Tell me about Pap. What points is he making about society to that character? And then specifically looking at the rant on pages 26 and 27, he says some crap about government and what is ironic about those when you consider his character. Okay? Questions on those? Okay, I'm going to give you about 20 minutes to work through these. Please partner up. Unless you haven't done your reading, then you can read through and do your best. Okay? Excellent. going over these questions from Huck Finn, chapters 1 through 7. Do you need to borrow a book today?
Oh, no.
Okay, excellent. And you can work with a partner, although I guess everyone's chosen the solo route, seems. But, you know, if you crave that human interaction, go for it. Take like another 3 minutes. I know you're probably not done, but we have a quick period today, so. We're just going over these questions in Canvas about your reading.
Oh, okay.
So you can just, do you need to borrow a book today?
Oh, Huckman, yeah.
Okay. Okay, yeah, no, we discussed that yesterday on the video, so you'll want to watch that. We're just about done, to be honest, but. Okay, I know that was probably not enough time, but we can just discuss kind of the last few, we didn't write anything down. So, tell me about the notice and explanatory. Why do you think Mark Twain includes that? What does it do for the reader? Please.
I feel like he includes it because, like, you would think that it would be like super formal and whatever, and maybe not important, but I feel like it's a little bit comical too. I feel like it kind of sets the tone for the rest of the book.
Absolutely.
Well, it's like serious topics, but it's looked at with a comical point of view.
Yeah, what makes it seem, what words make it seem comical and what part?
Well, like the first in the notice, it's kind of sarcastic, like people attempting to find it immoral will be banished. If they are trying to find the plot, you'll be shot. Like, it's not serious,
not
it's just
really.
being silly.
Yeah, for sure. And so it kind of sets that comical tone. that we're gonna see throughout this novel, because it is satire, it is meant to be humorous in parts and poke fun at their society. Good, anything else you wanna say about those? So in the explanatory as well, he talks about the different dialects, and Mark Twain was one of the first mainstream authors to employ dialect. It had been done before, but not as successfully and not in American literature, and so we'll see that as we read through, and you have probably already seen Huck talks with a little bit of a twang, Jim talks with a thicker accent, right? And so in that way, he's kind of creating some social classes within the book. But he mentions that, and he's one of the first authors to do so successfully in America, which is really cool. So we'll talk about more why he does that, probably next class, because this one is too short. But yeah, what then if the author tells you that there are no morals or lessons in this book and that you'll be shot if you try? What does that do to you as a reader? If I tell you not to think about pink elephants, what do you think of? Pink elephants. If I tell you not to find a moral or lesson, what will you try to do?
Find a moral.
Find a moral and lesson. And it kind of sets the tone, like, should I believe you? Should I not? Okay, and so you'll look at them and be like, wait, this isn't here. And it causes you to think about it, I think, a little bit more than maybe you would have otherwise. Because it's like, don't think about pink elephants. Don't try to make meaning out of this book. And yet, that's probably what we'll do. And especially because we're doing an English class, right? Okay. Huck is a narrator. Why do you think Twain does this, and why is he ideal? Yeah, right.
He wants to portray like what Huck thinks and like his kind of perception on life.
Okay, and why would his perception or what he thinks be a good place for a reader to view this story through? Anyone can answer. Remember, there are like participation points in this class, so feel free to speak up. Mary.
I guess because he's still like young, he still has a certain innocence to him. He's still like learning about all these different things. Someone could relate to him, especially since like he's white and learning about these different things. And I guess because like he has like a racist father and like racist people around him, but he still manages to like think for himself, I guess.
Yeah, I like that. So there's a certain innocence to him. Grace.
Yeah, I think he offers kind of a point of view that is really unique because of his age and just like this kind of funny experience, and he kind of forces you to think and see the world through his perspective because it's from his perspective, but then interpret that because there's a certain way to his narration that kind of leads to interpretation of what you think that means and how it applies
Yeah.
to the real world.
Awesome. Mac.
I think the author also wants like the reader to see like the good in humans because Huck thinks that like it's wrong. Like he doesn't think he doesn't think that like what he's doing. He thinks what he's doing is wrong.
Okay.
But he still does it anyways. But he thinks like, oh, I shouldn't be doing this. But he does the right thing, which he thinks what he's doing is wrong. But he does it anyway.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting, so I love all of these, right? He's innocent, he's naive, we get to see society through his eyes, in a way that is both judgmental and not judgmental, right? So he's in an interesting place in his life that we can kind of see both sides. And also, like, he often talks about, like, oh, like, I'm so evil, and like when he's talking, oh, sorry, I'm gonna sneeze. Maybe not. Woo! Okay. There you go. The worst sneezing in your mask. Anyway, but when he's talking about Tom, and he asked, I think he asked the widow, and not Miss Watson, but the widow. He's like, "Will Tom go to heaven?" And she's like, "No, I should think not." And he's like, "Well, I guess I will not go to heaven either, because I probably won't anyway. So it's good that we can be together." And he thinks he's wrong for thinking that. And yeah, I almost wonder if that's like more Christian, because he wants to be with the people he loves, and even if that's in hell, right? And so he thinks, oh, I'm so bad at all of these things, or I'm a heathen, And yet he's really not that bad, right? And we see kind of, when we get to the religion question, some juxtaposition there between, you know, the rules and regulations of religion, and then like someone who's actually seems to be a good moral person, right? But doesn't fit into these narrow strictures of what a religious person should be. So I like that too, where we get to see some of his morality at work, and because he's so young, he can think that he's bad, and it points out flaws in society, right? Like, oh, that is kind of flawed thinking if this person who is good and like, and yet thinks that they're so bad, like maybe we should look at religion differently, right? What do you think his most significant characteristic is? Yes, Lily.
He seems rather aloof, like, he's just willing to, like, do whatever and not care.
Okay.
Like, he doesn't seem to care very much about any one place, kind of all over the place.
Now, why would that be a good characteristic for Huck to have and for us to experience through his eyes?
Well, he seems, he, like, I didn't think this far into it.
Oh, that's okay.
Well, because he's so, like, almost calm, the way he describes things makes it so you can see it almost more without bias, kind of.
Yeah.
Because he's so, just doesn't care.
Yeah. There's some objectivity there because he just lets things happen. He lets Tom run amok, right? He's like, whatever, I think he's a total spaz, but he allows that to happen, so we get to have that experience. He also, you know, kind of tries to go along with what the widow tells him, and he's not super, I mean, he will make judgments in his mind afterwards about where he fits in those things, but it's not like he tries to do anything about it, right? He's kind of aloof, which allows us to experience a lot of different things through his eyes. So that, I think, is a good quality. Did anyone else say anything different? Someone in my first class said that they liked that he was very introspective. You think about Tom, he's kind of an actor before a doer, right? He just does whatever he wants. Whereas Huck will actually reflect on his experiences, like after he tries to pray for fish hooks and doesn't get them, he spends like 3 days in the woods just kind of pondering his decision, right? And so he does think about his actions and is introspective in a way that allows us to see kind of what Twain's judgments on society are, right? Because he can think through Huck's mind. So I thought that was a good characteristic as well. Okay. Huck's early attitude towards Jim. Do you think that he's caricatured early on in this novel? Graham, what do you think?
What is this?
This is number 4.
4.
Or tell us about the hairball.
I haven't read most of it, so I'm not sure.
Okay. Josh, have you read that far?
Not yet.
Okay. Who's read that far? Mary, you want to tell us about this hairball and then Jim? And
So Jim is a slave, and I'm pretty sure like a hairball is something he got from an animal's stomach or something, and could it tell the future or something? They brought him a fake quarter to him, and to tell him something in exchange with like this magical hairball.
yeah, it's kind of gross, but it's kind of like this crystal ball, right? And he throws it on the ground. You can tell certain things about the future in this way. Maddie, do you want to add to that at all? Or?
I read this book a while ago,
That's
so I'm like trying to make sure that I don't jump too far ahead.
No, that's fine. We can work it out. So just give us
Yeah.
whatever you got.
I do remember that, like, along with the hairball, Tom is super superstitious.
Yeah.
So, like, he takes meanings from those stuff and into things that they, you know.
Yeah. So he's superstitious. He portrays Jim as very superstitious. Do you guys think that he's caricatured? Do you think that he is kind of cookie cutter guy? Do you think that he has uniqueness to him? Yeah.
I don't really know what I think, but I think that if he is, I think it's to help add to the reader's understanding of Huck's like, perspective.
Okay.
Because at first Huck is, you know, racist towards him and just doesn't think of him as a human. And if he were caricatured, then it would help add to that idea that he's not really like a person. He's more like an object or something.
So getting more like that racial theme of like, of seeing black people as not real people. And yeah, I definitely think that there is some of that, right? Like they kind of, Tom and Huck try to sneak out, right? And they see Jim there, and Jim at first is awake, and they wait for him to fall asleep, and they play tricks on him, and he kind of looks like he's easily duped, and like he thinks that when his hat was like moved or whatever, oh, that was witches, and like they kind of make him look pretty naive and simple in this section. And so we'll have to see if that changes at all. Although he does go to him for the superstition thing and seem to take him as some sort of an authority figure. But I think he's more caricatured than not. Okay, let's see here. Let's talk about Tom and Huck and Tom's schemes, comparing and contrasting them. What is Huck like? What is Tom like? Yeah, Maddie.
Well, like, because Huck is, significantly younger, he still has like he likes to play like kind of games in a way. Like, he'll take like the funner route or like there's like a part in the movie where he's, trying to have Jim escape, and he takes the long route instead of like just, opening the door. That's just an example. Is he just like, he's more like, he's not as like like, I don't know where I'm trying to go with this, but he's just more like naive and doesn't like, and it just thinks of it more as a game, kind of.
Yeah, Tom is definitely there to play. He's a little bit extra on like everything, right?
Yeah.
Like, and he's imaginative. Versus Huck, and we always talked about how Huck is introspective. He does want to do the right thing, though because he's so young, often he feels like he's not doing the right thing and is pointing out societal flaws in that way. Tom, on the other hand, does he think about other people?
No.
Not really, no. What's his like main objective in life?
I think he likes the idea of like outsmarting people.
Okay, yeah.
Instead of like the real like actual like problem. Instead of like helping with it, he's more interested in like playing the game and outsmarting people. For him.
Yeah, he's about the fun, right, and making himself look better than other people, outsmarting people. He's pretty selfish in a lot of respects, right? Like even when, so Huck and all the boys are there for the gang, right? And they're like, okay, if you tell the secrets of the gang, we're gonna have to kill your family. And then all these boys are like, but Huck doesn't have any family to kill. And Tom doesn't even try to step in and like defend him. He's just like, oh yeah, we might have to kick you out. And then Huck's like, you can kill the widow. It's fine, right? Which I think is like the funniest part. Like, I'll offer her for you to murder, and they're like, okay, we will take that. That's great. But yeah, Tom doesn't really seem to care much about anyone but himself and his ideas, right? He's a lot of fun, but he's a total spaz. And so contrasting the two, we see Huck's introspection highlighted because of Tom's lack thereof, right? And we'll see more about why Twain is contrasting these two characters and what they're symbolic of. Juxtaposition between the widow and what Miss Watson says about religion. Why is there juxtaposition there, and what comments is Twain making about religion in this book? We touched on it slightly, but okay, let's read those pages, or that page. So on, I think it was page, was that 11? So he's talking to Miss Watson about his praying. She's like, you gotta pray for spiritual gifts. And he's like, well, that's them. And then about halfway through, he says, sometimes the widow would take me one side and talk about providence, which is another name for like God, right? in a way to make a body's mouth water. But maybe next day, Miss Watson would take hold and knock it all down again. I judged I could see that there was two providences, and a poor chap would stand considerable show with the widow's providence. But if Miss Watson's got hold of him, there weren't no help for him anymore. I thought it all out, and I reckoned I would belong to the widow's if he wanted me. Though I couldn't make out how he was going to be any better off than before, or than he was before, seeing I was so ignorant and so kind of low down and ornery. So tell me about the two different providences, or like versions of God that these women create. Yes, Grace.
So I think the widow, you know, has this very putting God on a pedestal and seeing God as like a perfect, awesome person. And then Miss Watson, you know, kind of sees God as like a dictator who, you know, makes our lives miserable. And so he's kind of pulled in between those two, like really, really intense ends of the spectrum. Yeah, and then in his own viewing of himself, he's also pulled in those two different ways of good and bad and stuff.
Yeah, there's kind of two versions of God. You got like the widow's kind of kind, gentle, he can do anything, he's omnipotent version. And then Miss Watson's like Old Testament, bent on justice, you will pay for your sins type of God. And he's like, ugh, well, if I had to choose one, I'd definitely go with the widow's. But I don't see how I would help him at all, right? Because I'm so low down in ornery, right? He's like, but, you know, if you'd have me, I'd take that God, right? Anything else you guys want to say about religion and how it's portrayed in this book and why Twain maybe is doing that? Yeah, Marathi.
Even earlier on in the book, like when Huck said that he wanted to go to the bad place, and the widow got really angry at him, like just saying, you shouldn't say that and stuff, I would never say that and stuff. It kind of just shows that the widow is religious and whatever, like that we already established, but it shows that the widow doesn't really teach about religion, it's more of, you shouldn't think like that. So kind of shows that Mark Twain probably had some kind of experience like that.
Yeah, maybe he did. There's definitely, you know, those, like, have you heard like letter of the law versus spirit of the law? So letter of the law is like, these are the rules, you follow the rules. Spirit of the law is more like, here's like what they're trying to get at, what attributes you should have. And so Huck's kind of moving from a, like, he's trying to do what the letter of the law says, and yet he's not feeling those feelings that you should if you're like feeling like religious, right? And so he's confused because he's like, why shouldn't I want to be with my friend? Like, and I mean, like, that's a very, I think, noble thing, right? He's like, fine, I'll go to hell if I can be with Tom. And the widow's like horrified. She's like, why would you say that? But in this way, he's pointing out some of that hypocrisy in the South where, you know, they say that they're religious, they follow all the rules, and yet many of their behaviors contradict what a true Christian should be doing, right? And so we see some of that set up here. And we'll see that a lot more. And perhaps Mark Twain had some of those experiences. Okay, what about Pap? Tell me about Pap. What's he like? Maddie?
He's a pretty bad person.
Yeah, why?
Well, he basically like disregards Huck and like doesn't take care of him. Kind of like, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, Huck's mom died and then Pap blames Huck for the death.
I think that that's in there somewhere, but I don't know if it's in this.
And he kind of like, there was a time where like he gets drunk all the time, takes all this money and basically just wants to use it on alcohol. And so, and then, are you guys, I don't know, but he came home and got mad at Huck and like almost killed him.
Yeah, I was like super mad, right?
Yeah.
Called him the angel of death because he's so drunk and out of his mind.
Yeah.
And then he rants here about the government. What's ironic about how he's talking about government? What do you think? Lillian, do you know what's ironic about this chunk?
Well, what I noticed was that he's getting mad at the government for like taking away his son, but he's like really abusive and is separating himself from his son.
Yeah, he's not like government separating fathers and sons, but like he's been pretty crappy. And why does he want Huck now? Well, because in Tom Sawyer, in that book before, they found a bunch of money in a cave, and now he's like, yeah, I'd like that. But Huck said,
The
Judge, take it, right? Yeah, did you wanna?
Yeah, I mean, like, he gave so the judge bought all this money from Huck for $1, so but he'll basically just get it back when Huck gets older and can have the money for himself because Pap will try to take all that money.
Yeah, he'll try and take it and drink it and probably leave Huck again, right? So he doesn't really care, and so it's ironic that he's telling about that. He also kind of says some things to do with racism. What does he say about voting? Does anyone remember?
Doesn't he say something like he's not gonna vote as long as a black person's allowed to vote or something?
Yeah, he's like, I saw this free black man voting, and this is, even though it's written during Reconstruction, he's writing it about slavery, so it's set in the time of slavery. He's like, I'm done voting for a government that does that. Like, how dare they do that? Which, again, is ironic because this person, we don't know anything about him, but I assume that he's got to be more useful to society than freaking Pap out here, right? And so, also, you know, today's election day, right? If you don't vote, you don't get to complain about what happens. I feel like maybe I shouldn't say that. Don't quote me on that video. Anyway, but you know, like, how can he have a lot to say about how the government is run if he's not willing to participate in the democratic process, right? Okay. So we're going to probably start this and then not finish, but I'm going to show you a little intro video about Mark Twain, and yeah, we'll get through what we can and probably just finish it up next time. Let me find it. Okay, so it's like a 3-minute video. Usually we probably watch them in a little bit more in depth, but COVID, so whatever.
Mark Twain really is one of the most incredible and influential
sorry.
writers in American
You gotta tell me what
literature,
you've done
and his
today.
influence is still very much palpable in writing today.
Called by many the father of American literature, Mark Twain was born Samuel Langhorne Clemens on November 30th, 1835, in Missouri.
When Samuel was 12, his father died of pneumonia. At the age of 15, he got a job working for his brother Orion's newspaper, the Hannibal Western Union.
Mark Twain became a cub pilot on a steamboat on the Mississippi River. He later became a full-fledged pilot, and he thought it was the best time of his life. But in 1861, when the Civil War broke out, the steamboat trade absolutely came to an end, and he was out of a job.
Twain very briefly served in the Confederate military. That did not work out, so he then headed west with his brother. He eventually made his way to San Francisco and really began his career again as a journalist.
Twain's first big literary break came in 1865 with the publication of Jim Smiley and His Jumping Frog.
It was a huge success and was printed and reprinted all over the country. His first bestseller was Innocents Abroad, which was published in 1869, and it's still very much one of the most successful and widely renowned travel narratives of American literature.
Mark Twain's best-known and best-loved books, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, published in 1876, and Huckleberry Finn, published in 1885, are probably the reason that Ernest Hemingway famously said in 1935 that all American literature comes from Mark Twain.
Huck Finn shows the possibility of making genuine moral changes in a world that's dominated by racism and other forms of human folly. It also is a book that was able to capture the vernacular speech of different classes along the Mississippi, and Twain was the first person to put this kind of vocabulary into American writing.
Twain was an immensely prolific writer. He wrote 28 books, a vast number of stories, lectures, essays.
In his last 15 years, Mark Twain was probably the most celebrated American around the world. He received honorary degrees from Yale and from Oxford, and in 1895 and 96, in order to pay off debts, He did a lecture tour around the world, which drew huge crowds.
Mark Twain is now thought of as America's first celebrity because he was so good at capturing the public imagination, and it became important to him to have a public image. He always went on book tour wearing a white suit, and he only wanted to be photographed in that white suit. He tended that image very carefully.
At the age of 74, Mark Twain died at his Connecticut home on April 21st, 1910.
I think Mark Twain is one of these towering figures in American literature because he is funny and smart and willing to sort of shoot arrows at the most powerful. And I think that there's something deeply in the American character that responds to that.
Okay, very quick. So Mark Twain grew up on the river. He lost his father early on, and so there are some similarities between Mark Twain and the character of Huck Finn. It's definitely not autobiographical, but I think he draws from that. And in fact, his pen name, Mark Twain, comes from this phrase that they would use on the steamboats where they would make sure that the water was deep enough, and so they would yell out, Mark Twain. I believe a Twain was like 14 feet, but I could totally be off. So they would stick this pole down and make sure it was at least that deep. So he kind of took that. He really grew up on the river. So in this book, and we'll probably get cut off, we're going to talk about two literary movements. The first is called Romanticism, and the second is called Realism. So we'll review those more next time. But Mark Twain hated Romanticism, and really Romanticism was this fairy tale type story.
Attention teachers and students, you should be shifting and beginning the survey that you need to do on Canvas right now, teachers. You can have the students begin to take that, and thank you so much.
Oh, she's cheery. Okay. Realism then is a reaction to Romanticism. People are sick of people creating these worlds based on beauty and creativity and ignoring the way that the world really is, right? And so realism isn't so much like, a lot of people think it's like, oh, they just like show the ugliness of life. But it's not that they necessarily want to, but they're not going to avoid that. They're not going to lie about how life really is, and they focus on truth. So we'll talk more about that next time. Sorry, this day is so short. Now you get to take a fun survey. But first, we're going to watch an even more fun video. So good. Maybe I shouldn't be sarcastic. I'm going to turn this off before I get myself in trouble.